Some people think love means never having to say you're sorry. I used to believe that family meant never having to protect yourself from those who share your blood. After 62 years on this earth, I've learned that both beliefs are dangerously naive. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time, even when that someone carried your last name before she took another, even when you held her in your arms as she took her first breath, even when every instinct in your maternal heart screams that this can't be happening. Trust is like fine china. Once it's shattered, all the glue in the world won't make it hold water again. My daughter Rebecca learned this lesson far too late, but by then, the damage was already done. By then, I had already made my choice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, though everyone in Millbrook, Oregon calls me Maggie. I've lived in this small town, nestled in the Cascade foothills for 38 years, ever since my late husband David and I moved here from Portland, when Rebecca was just 4 years old. David passed 7 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in the house we built together on Birch Lane, the house where we raised our only child, the house that became both my sanctuary and my prison. The house sits on 2 acres of Douglas fir and oak, with a wraparound porch that David built by hand and a garden where I've grown prize-winning dahlias for 2 decades. It's a modest 3-bedroom craftsman with original hardwood floors and built-in bookcases that David crafted in his workshop. Nothing fancy by city standards, but in Millbrook, where the median home price hovers around $200,000, my property is worth considerably more due to its size and location near the National Forest. David had been a logger before his back gave out, then transitioned to furniture making. I worked part-time at the local elementary school as a reading specialist while raising Rebecca. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. More importantly, we were happy. The house represented everything we had built together, every sacrifice we had made, every dream we had shared. After David's funeral, Rebecca had been supportive, calling twice a week from Seattle where she worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup. She'd visit every few months, bringing her boyfriend Marcus, a software engineer with an easy smile and expensive tastes. I liked Marcus well enough, though something about his constant talk of investments and real estate opportunities made me slightly uncomfortable. Still, Rebecca seemed happy, and that was what mattered most to me. The first hint that something had changed came 6 months ago when Rebecca's calls became less frequent. When I did hear from her, the conversations felt different, more businesslike, less personal. She asked pointed questions about my finances, my health, my plans for the future. Questions that, at the time, I attributed to normal concern for an aging parent living alone. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" she'd asked, during one particularly memorable call in March. "That house is so big for just you, and the maintenance must be overwhelming." I'd laughed it off. "Overwhelming? Rebecca, your father and I maintained this place for decades. I think I can handle it for a few more years. But what about when you can't? What about when you need assisted living or medical care? Wouldn't it be smarter to sell now while the market is good and move somewhere more manageable?" Her persistence troubled me, but I dismissed it as the natural worry of a daughter who lived 3 hours away and couldn't be there to help with day-to-day concerns. I had no idea that she and Marcus were already researching real estate values. In my area, no idea that they had been discussing my future without including me in the conversation. The engagement announcement came in April. Rebecca called on a Tuesday evening, breathless with excitement, to tell me that Marcus had proposed during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. The wedding was planned for October, a small ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. I was thrilled for her, genuinely happy that she had found someone who made her smile the way she described. "We're thinking of a honeymoon in Europe," she'd gushed. "Marcus has always wanted to see Italy, and I've dreamed of Paris since I was little. Remember how we used to look at those travel magazines together when I was young? I did remember. We'd spent hours poring over pictures of the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, the canals of Venice. I'd promised her that someday we'd take that trip together. Life, as it often does, had other plans. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Your father would have loved to see you travel the world. The only problem is the cost, she'd continued. A really nice European honeymoon, the kind Marcus has planned, is expensive. We're talking about 3 weeks, first-class flights, luxury hotels. It would be the trip of a lifetime. I'd offered to help within my means, perhaps a few $1,000s as a wedding gift. Rebecca had thanked me, but said they were looking at a much larger budget. That should have been my second warning sign, but love makes us blind to uncomfortable truths, especially when it comes to our children. The visits became more frequent after the engagement. Rebecca and Marcus would drive down from Seattle every few weeks, ostensibly to plan wedding details and spend time with me. During these visits, Marcus would wander through my house with what I now recognize as an appraiser's eye, commenting on the original fixtures, the quality of the craftsmanship, the potential of the property. Your mom has a real gem here, he'd tell Rebecca within my hearing. The bones of this house are incredible. With some updates, this could be worth serious money. It's not about money, Rebecca would reply, but her tone lacked conviction. It's about Mom being comfortable and safe. Those conversations made me increasingly uneasy, but I told myself I was being paranoid. These were my daughter and her fiancé, not strangers plotting against me. They loved me, wanted what was best for me. I was simply misinterpreting their concern as something more sinister. The third warning sign came in July when I overheard a phone conversation that Rebecca didn't know I was listening to. She was on the back porch, speaking in hushed tones to someone I assumed was Marcus. I had come outside to water my dahlias when her words stopped me cold. She's being stubborn about it, Rebecca was saying. I've dropped hints, but she's not taking them. We need to be more direct. A pause as she listened to the other person. I know it's her house, but she's 62 and living alone. What happens when she falls and breaks a hip? What happens when she can't drive anymore? We're thinking about her future here. Another pause. No, I haven't told her about the cruise. She'd never agree to that kind of expense. But Marcus found this amazing 3-week Mediterranean cruise that would be perfect for our honeymoon. It's just that it costs $40,000. My breath caught in my throat. $40,000. That was more than I made in a year at the elementary school. If we could get her to sell the house and move into one of those nice senior communities, she'd be so much happier. And the proceeds from the sale would more than cover our honeymoon and help set up her new living situation. It's win-win. I stood frozen among my dahlias, the watering can heavy in my hands, as the full scope of what I was hearing began to sink in. My daughter and her fiancé weren't concerned about my welfare. They were concerned about accessing my assets. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I called my old friend Patricia, who had worked as a real estate agent in Millbrook for 20 years before retiring. I asked her to do me a favor and research the current market value of my property. What she told me made my stomach turn. Maggie, your place is worth at least $400,000, maybe more to the right buyer. That location, that acreage, the quality of David's craftsmanship. You're sitting on a gold mine. $400,000. Enough for Rebecca and Marcus to fund not just an extravagant honeymoon, but a substantial down payment on a house, investment opportunities, a complete lifestyle upgrade, enough to make a daughter forget about her mother's happiness in pursuit of her own dreams. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where David and I had shared thousands of meals, where Rebecca had done her homework, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays and all the small moments that make a house a home. I thought about trust and betrayal, about the difference between love and manipulation, about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. By morning, I had made my decision. If Rebecca wanted to play games with my future, then I would play along. But I would be playing by my own rules. The next phase of my education began immediately. I spent the following weeks researching senior living communities, not because I wanted to move, but because I needed to understand what Rebecca was proposing. What I discovered was both illuminating and infuriating. The nice senior communities that Rebecca had mentioned in her phone conversation ranged from $1,500 to $3,000 per month, depending on the level of care provided. Even the most basic independent living facilities would consume a significant portion of my retirement income. The fancier places that might actually make someone happy to live there were well beyond what I could afford long-term, even with the proceeds from selling my house. Rebecca's plan, I realized, wasn't really about my happiness or safety. It was about accessing my equity while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. She could tell herself and others that she was looking out for her aging mother while simultaneously funding her dream honeymoon with my life's work. I also began researching legal protections for elderly homeowners. What I learned was sobering. Elder financial abuse was more common than I had imagined, and adult children were often the perpetrators. Stories of families pressuring elderly relatives to sell homes, sign over assets, or make financial decisions against their best interests filled page after page of legal websites and support forums. Armed with this knowledge, I made an appointment with Thomas Brennan, the most respected attorney in Millbrook. Tom had handled David's will and had been a family friend for years. I trusted him to give me honest advice about my situation. "Maggie," Tom said after I explained what I had overheard, "I'm glad you came to see me. What you're describing is, unfortunately, common, and it often escalates after the elderly person becomes more vulnerable or isolated." "But she's my daughter," I protested, even though I had already accepted the truth. "She wouldn't actually try to force me out of my home." Tom's expression was gentle but serious. Financial pressure from family members can be incredibly subtle and effective. They don't usually use force. They use guilt, fear, and emotional manipulation. They convince you that what they want is actually what's best for you. He recommended several protective measures I could take immediately. First, I should document everything, including the overheard phone conversations and any future attempts to pressure me about selling. Second, I should consider putting my property in a trust to protect it from potential future manipulation. Third, I should be very careful about any documents Rebecca or Marcus might ask me to sign. Most importantly, Tom said, don't let them isolate you from other sources of advice and support. Financial predators work best when their victims don't have other perspectives to consider. I left Tom's office with a clear plan of action and a new understanding of just how serious my situation had become. Rebecca wasn't just being thoughtless or greedy. She was following a pattern of behavior that could escalate into full-scale elder abuse if I didn't take steps to protect myself. The wedding planning intensified as summer progressed. Rebecca and Marcus visited more frequently, each time bringing new details about their October ceremony and their planned European honeymoon. Marcus had upgraded their trip from a simple tour to a luxury cruise that would visit 8 countries over 3 weeks. The cost had increased accordingly. "We've been looking at smaller wedding venues to save money for the honeymoon," Rebecca explained during one visit in August. "Marcus's parents are helping with some of the costs, but the honeymoon is really our priority. We'll only get married once, and we want it to be perfect." I noticed that she no longer asked directly about my willingness to help financially. Instead, she made pointed comments about my living situation, the size of the house, the burden of maintenance, the isolation of living alone. She'd bring up stories of elderly people who had fallen in their homes and not been found for days, of seniors who had been taken advantage of by contractors or scammers, of the peace of mind that came with living in a community with built-in support systems. Marcus was more direct in his approach. He'd comment on the outdated electrical system, the need for a new roof within the next few years, the expense of heating such a large house. He'd mention the hot real estate market, the advantage of selling before interest rates went up, the wisdom of downsizing before physical limitations made moving more difficult. "Maggie," he said during one particularly memorable conversation, "Rebecca and I have been looking at some really nice retirement communities in the area. There's one about 20 minutes from here that has everything a person could want. Golf course, swimming pool, organized activities, medical staff on site. And the entrance fee is very reasonable when you factor in what you'd get for this place." I smiled politely and told him I'd think about it, but internally I was documenting every word. Tom had given me a small digital recorder, and I had begun keeping detailed notes of every conversation that touched on my housing situation or finances. The breakthrough came in September, just 3 weeks before the wedding. Rebecca called on a Friday afternoon, her voice tight with what she described as wedding stress, but which I recognized as barely controlled frustration. "Mom, we need to talk about something important. Can Marcus and I come down this weekend? There's been a development with the honeymoon plans that affects our timeline." I agreed to the visit, though every instinct told me this would be the conversation I had been preparing for. I spent Friday evening reviewing my notes, checking my recording equipment, and mentally rehearsing the responses Tom and I had practiced. They arrived Saturday morning with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery in town, a transparent attempt to soften me up for whatever they had planned. We sat on the front porch, the same porch where David had proposed to me 39 years earlier, where we had watched Rebecca take her first steps, where I had comforted her through teenage heartbreaks and celebrated her college graduation. "Mom," Rebecca began, her voice carefully modulated, "Marcus and I have been doing a lot of thinking about your situation here." "My situation?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Living alone in this big house, so far from medical facilities, without family nearby to help if something happens. We've been worried about you." Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We found the perfect solution. There's a senior living community in Portland, about an hour from where we live. It's beautiful, Maggie. Luxury apartments, gourmet, dining, fitness center, library. You'd have your own space, but with all the security and support you need." "It sounds expensive," I said carefully. "That's the beauty of it," Rebecca said, her excitement now genuine. "The entrance fee is exactly what you'd get from selling this house. You'd essentially be trading equity for security and peace of mind." I let that statement hang in the air for a moment, giving them time to elaborate on their plan. I wanted everything on record. "Plus," Marcus continued, "you'd be so much closer to us. We could visit every week, help with shopping or errands, really be a part of your daily life instead of just seeing you every few months." "And the timing works out perfectly," Rebecca added. "If we could get the house on the market next week, it should sell by the end of October. You could move into the Portland community by Thanksgiving. It would be a fresh start for your next chapter." There it was, the timeline that would allow them to access the proceeds from my house sale before their honeymoon in November. Everything clicked into place with crystal clarity. "What about the honeymoon?" I asked innocently. "I thought you were worried about the cost." Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a quick glance. "Actually," Marcus said, "my parents have offered to help with that as a wedding gift. But only if we can show them that we're being financially responsible in other areas." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired their preparation. Almost. "I see," I said. "And you need me to make this decision quickly because of the real estate market timing?" "Exactly," Rebecca said, relief evident in her face. "Tom suggested we could even arrange for you to sign a power of attorney, so Marcus and I could handle the sale details while you focus on planning your move. We know how stressful these transitions can be." Tom, they had already spoken to my attorney. Or rather, they thought they had. It took me a moment to realize they were referring to a different Tom, probably a real estate agent or attorney they had consulted about the sale process. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "This is a big decision. I'd like to sleep on it." The disappointment that flashed across both their faces told me everything I needed to know about their true timeline and priorities. They had planned this entire conversation as the moment when I would gratefully accept their solution to my fictional problem. "Of course," Rebecca said quickly. "But Mom, we really need to move on this soon. The market won't stay this hot forever, and the community in Portland only has a few units available." After they left, I sat on my porch until the sun went down, thinking about the choices we make and the people we become. I thought about David, who had worked 6 days a week for 20 years to pay off the mortgage on this house. I thought about Rebecca as a little girl, helping me plant dahlias in the garden, promising she would always take care of me when I got old. Most of all, I thought about the conversation I would have with them next weekend, when they returned. For my answer, because I had decided to give them exactly what they were asking for, just not in the way they expected. The week that followed was the busiest of my life. I met with Tom Brennan twice to finalize the legal documents we had been preparing. I visited my bank to arrange certain financial transfers. I drove to Portland to tour the senior living community that Rebecca and Marcus had mentioned, not because I planned to live there, but because I wanted to understand exactly what they thought they were selling me. The community was beautiful, I had to admit. Spacious apartments with modern kitchens, elegant common areas, professional staff, every amenity an active senior could want. It was also exactly as expensive as I had calculated, with entrance fees, starting at $350,000 and monthly charges that would consume most of my retirement income. The sales representative, a cheerful woman named Linda, gave me a complete tour and presentation. When I asked about the availability that my daughter had mentioned, Linda looked confused. "We actually have a waiting list right now," she said. "The earliest opening wouldn't be until next spring, and that's only if one of our current residents moves to our assisted living wing." Another lie. Rebecca and Marcus had fabricated the urgency about limited availability, just as they had fabricated their parents' offer to help with honeymoon costs. The web of deception was more extensive than I had realized. I also took the opportunity to visit several other senior communities in the Portland area, gathering brochures and pricing information. What I found was consistent. Every facility that offered the kind of lifestyle Rebecca claimed to want for me would cost more than the proceeds from selling my house. The cheaper options that I could actually afford long-term were institutional and depressing. Exactly the kind of places that would make an independent person like me miserable. Rebecca's plan, I realized, wasn't about securing a comfortable future for me. It was about accessing my money in the short term, regardless of what happened to me in the long term. Once the house was sold and the money spent, I would be the one dealing with the consequences of their financial decisions. By Friday, everything was in place. Tom had prepared all the necessary documents. My bank had confirmed the arrangements we had discussed. I had even packed a suitcase, though not for the reasons Rebecca would expect. They arrived Saturday morning with the same coffee and pastries, the same forced cheerfulness, the same barely concealed anxiety about my decision. This time they brought a folder of documents. "We took the liberty of getting some paperwork ready," Marcus explained, setting the folder on the kitchen table. "Real estate contracts, power of attorney forms, even some preliminary applications for the Portland community. We thought it would save time if you decide to move forward." I smiled and poured coffee, playing the role of the grateful mother who was touched by their thoughtfulness. "You've been so busy with wedding planning. I can't believe you found time to do all this research for me." "Family comes first," Rebecca said, though she couldn't quite meet my eyes as she said it. I sat down at the table and opened the folder, pretending to review documents I had already examined with Tom. Everything was designed to transfer control of my assets to Rebecca and Marcus as quickly as possible. The power of attorney was broadly written, giving them authority over all my financial decisions. The real estate listing agreement had already been filled out with an asking price and closing date. Even the community application had been completed, in my name, with Rebecca listed as my emergency contact and financial representative. "This is very thorough," I said. "You've thought of everything." "We want to make this as easy as possible for you," Marcus said. "All you need to do is sign, and we'll handle the rest." "There's just one thing I need to clarify," I said, setting down the documents. "I want to make sure I understand the timeline correctly." Rebecca leaned forward eagerly. "What do you need to know?" "Well, you're getting married in 3 weeks. Your honeymoon is in November. If I sign these papers today, when exactly would I be moving to Portland?" "We were thinking right after Thanksgiving," Rebecca said. "That gives us time to sell the house and get you all set up in your new place." "And where would I live between now and then? Between selling the house and moving into the community?" Another quick glance between them. "We thought you could stay with us in Seattle temporarily," Marcus said. "Just for a few weeks while everything gets finalized." I nodded thoughtfully. "I see. So I would sell my house, give up my independence, move in with newlyweds who are planning to spend 3 weeks in Europe, and wait for an opening at a facility that may or may not have space available." The silence that followed was telling. Rebecca recovered first, her voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "Mom, it's not like that. We're trying to help you transition to a better situation. The house is too much for you to manage alone." "Is it?" I asked. "Because I seem to be managing just fine. I maintain the property, pay all my bills, drive myself wherever I need to, go and take care of my own needs without assistance." "But what about when you can't?" Marcus interjected. "What about when you fall or get sick or need help with daily activities? Wouldn't you rather be somewhere with professional support?" I smiled at him, the same smile I had perfected over 38 years of dealing with people who underestimated me. "That's very thoughtful, Marcus, but I have a different idea." I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, retrieving the folder I had prepared with Tom's help. "Instead of me moving to accommodate your timeline, why don't we try a different approach?" I placed the folder on the table between us. "These are some alternative options I've been researching." Rebecca opened the folder, and her face went pale as she read the top document. It was a detailed financial analysis showing the true costs of the senior living communities they had recommended, including entrance fees, monthly charges, and additional costs for services. "As you can see," I continued, "even if I sold the house for full asking price, I couldn't afford to live in any of these places for more than a few years. After that, I'd be dependent on you and Marcus for financial support." Marcus was reading over Rebecca's shoulder, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable as he processed the numbers. "But that's not the most interesting document in—" "There," I said. "Keep reading." The next page was a printout of real estate listings for luxury homes in the Seattle area, specifically in the neighborhoods where Rebecca and Marcus had been looking to buy. The prices ranged from $500,000 to $800,000. "These are the houses you've been touring, aren't they?" I asked. "The ones that would require a substantial down payment, the kind of down payment that would come from, say, the proceeds of selling a $400,000 house in Millbrook." Rebecca's hands were shaking as she flipped to the next page, which was a detailed breakdown of luxury European cruise costs, including the specific Mediterranean voyage that Marcus had researched. $43,000 for the honeymoon. Sweet package they had selected. "I have to admit," I said, sitting back down, "your plan was quite sophisticated. Convince me that I needed to move for my own safety and happiness. Arrange for the house sale to close just before your honeymoon. Use my equity to fund your new lifestyle, while positioning yourselves as the caring children who were looking out for their elderly mother." The silence in my kitchen was deafening. Rebecca was staring at the documents as if they might disappear if she looked away. Marcus had gone completely still, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "The only problem," I continued, "is that you made one crucial mistake." "Mom," Rebecca started, but I held up my hand. "You assumed I was naive enough to believe that this was about my welfare instead of your honeymoon fund. You assumed I wouldn't research the communities you recommended or verify your claims about availability and costs. Most importantly, you assumed I wouldn't discover the real timeline driving your urgency." I reached across the table and flipped to the final document in my folder. It was a bank statement showing a recent deposit of $425,000 into an account bearing only my name. "You see, Rebecca, I did sell the house. Yesterday, actually. To a lovely couple from Portland who were looking for a weekend retreat in the mountains. They paid cash and were willing to close immediately." Rebecca's face went white. "You sold the house? But we had plans. We had everything arranged." "You had everything arranged," I corrected. "I was never consulted about whether I actually wanted to give up my home to fund your lifestyle choices." Marcus finally found his voice. "Maggie, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were trying to help you." "Were you?" I asked. "Because the documents in that folder suggest you were trying to help yourselves. The house is sold, Marcus. The money is in my account, not yours. And I've made my own arrangements for the future." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I had spent so many peaceful hours. "I'm moving to Costa Rica next month. I've purchased a small house near the beach in a community of American expats. The cost of living is a fraction of what it would be here. The weather is beautiful year-round, and I'll be able to live comfortably on my retirement income while keeping the house proceeds as a safety net." Rebecca had started crying, though whether from guilt or disappointment, I couldn't tell. "Mom, please. Let's talk about this rationally. You can't just move to another country. What about medical care? What about being near family?" "What about it?" I asked, turning back to face them. "You were perfectly willing to have me move to Portland, an hour away from you, into an institutional setting where I would see you occasionally between your own busy lives. How is Costa Rica any different, except that I'll be warm and independent instead of cold and isolated?" Marcus was studying the bank statement with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. "The sale price," he said slowly. "This is more than we calculated the house was worth." "You calculated correctly for the local market," I said. "But you didn't factor in the premium that some buyers will pay for a turnkey property with significant land and privacy. The couple who bought it plans to add a workshop and expand the garden. They saw value that you missed because you were only thinking about quick cash." I returned to my seat at the table, feeling calmer than I had in months. "There's one more document I want to show you." I pulled out a letter-sized envelope with Rebecca's name written on it in my handwriting. "I wrote this for you before you arrived today. It explains my decision and my feelings about how this situation developed." Rebecca took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. "Mom, please don't do this. We can work something out. Maybe we were wrong about the timing, but we were genuinely worried about you." "Were you?" I asked again. "Because worried daughters call their mothers to ask how they're feeling, not to research the equity in their homes. Worried daughters visit to spend time together, not to pressure their mothers into life-changing financial decisions that coincidentally benefit their own wedding plans." I gestured to the papers scattered across the table. "Everything you needed to know about my well-being could have been learned through conversation and genuine concern. Instead, you chose manipulation and deception." Marcus cleared his throat. "Maggie, I think we should discuss this more. Moving to another country is a major decision that shouldn't be made in anger." "Anger?" I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. "Marcus, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed, yes. Hurt, certainly. But angry? No. Anger implies that I expected better behavior from you both. And honestly, the signs were there for months. I chose not to see them because I wanted to believe that. My daughter loved me more than she loved my money. Rebecca's tears were flowing freely now. I do love you, Mom. More than anything. The money was never the point. Wasn't it? I asked gently. Then explain the timeline. Explain why this conversation couldn't wait until after your honeymoon. Explain why you've been researching real estate values and senior living costs without discussing it with me first. Explain why you brought power of attorney documents to what you described as a preliminary conversation. She couldn't, of course, because there was no explanation that didn't involve their need for immediate access to my assets. The $43,000 honeymoon required a down payment within weeks, not months. The house they wanted to buy required a substantial cash offer in a competitive market. Their entire plan was built around a timeline that served their needs, not mine. Mom? Rebecca said, her voice small and desperate. What can we do to fix this? How can we make it right? I considered her question seriously. It was the first honest thing she had said all morning, and it deserved an honest answer. You can't, I said finally. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal just because we want it to. You've shown me who you really are, Rebecca. Both of you have. You're people who are willing to manipulate and deceive an elderly family member to get what you want. That's not something that can be fixed with apologies or promises to do better. I stood up and began clearing the coffee cups from the table, a domestic action that somehow made the conversation feel even more final. Your wedding is in 3 weeks. I won't be attending. Mom, no, Rebecca gasped. Please don't let this ruin my wedding day. I'm not ruining anything, I said firmly. I'm simply choosing not to participate in a celebration of a marriage that was partly funded by attempts to defraud me. You and Marcus are free to have whatever kind of wedding you want, but you'll do it without my presence and without my money. I looked at Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for the past few minutes. I assume you'll find another way to pay for the honeymoon you've already booked? His silence was answer enough. They had been counting on my money, not just for the honeymoon, but possibly for other wedding expenses as well. The scope of their financial planning around my assets was likely even broader than I had realized. There's something else you should know, I said, returning to my seat. One final time. I've changed my will. The house proceeds and my other assets will be donated to various charities upon my death. Organizations that help elderly people avoid financial abuse, literacy programs, environmental conservation groups. Causes that matter to me and would have mattered to your father. Rebecca's face crumpled completely. You're cutting me out of your will because of this? I'm redirecting my assets to places where they'll do good instead of enabling bad behavior. I corrected. If you had approached me honestly about your financial needs, if you had respected my right to make my own decisions about my living situation, things might have been different. But you chose deception over honesty, manipulation over respect. I picked up the power of attorney documents from the table and held them up. Did you really think I would sign these without reading them? Did you think I wouldn't notice that? They gave you control over all my finances, not just the house sale? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Those are standard forms. They're designed to make the process smoother. For whom? I asked. Because they certainly weren't designed to protect my interests. They were designed to give you complete control over my life savings, while I waited for an opening at a senior community that doesn't actually have immediate availability. I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a folder of my own research. I called the Portland community you recommended. There's a 6-month waiting list, minimum. I also researched the costs you quoted. They were about 30% lower than the actual fees. The evidence of their deception kept mounting with each revelation. They had lied about availability, understated costs, misrepresented their parents' financial contribution, and attempted to rush me into irreversible decisions based on false information. The saddest part, I said, looking directly at Rebecca, is that if you had simply asked for help with wedding expenses, I would have found a way to contribute. Not $40,000, but something meaningful. If you had expressed genuine concern about my living situation, we could have discussed options that protected both my independence and my security. Rebecca wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. It's too late now, isn't it? For what? I asked. For us, for our relationship, for any chance of making this right. I considered her question carefully. It was perhaps the most important question either of us would ever ask or answer. I don't know, I said honestly. Trust is like a broken bone. Sometimes it heals stronger than before, but sometimes it never heals properly at all. Right now, I can't imagine trusting either of you with anything important ever again. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Maggie, what we did was wrong. I know that now. But please don't destroy Rebecca's life because of my mistakes. I turned to look at him, this young man who had seemed so charming when I first met him, who had made my daughter laugh and dream of a future together. Now I saw him clearly for what he was, someone who viewed relationships as transactions, who saw my love for Rebecca as a weakness to be exploited. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus. I'm protecting myself from people who would use my love against me. There's a difference. Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need some air, she said, walking toward the back door. This is too much. I watched her go, noting how she moved with the same restless energy she'd had as a child, when confronted with consequences for her actions. Some patterns never change, no matter how old we get. Marcus remained seated, staring at the bank statement as if he could will the numbers to change. How long have you known? He asked. Known what, specifically? That we were planning to use the money from the house sale. I considered lying, giving him some face-saving version of events, but decided he deserved the truth. I've suspected something was wrong since March. I knew for certain when I overheard Rebecca's phone conversation in July. His head snapped up. July? You've known for 2 months and you didn't say anything? I wanted to give you both the opportunity to do the right thing. I kept hoping that Rebecca would come to me honestly, that she would trust me enough to tell me about your financial needs without trying to manipulate me into solving them. Why didn't you just confront us then? I sat back down across from him, studying his face. He looked younger than his 31 years, like a boy who had been caught stealing and couldn't understand why he was in trouble. Because confronting you wouldn't have shown me who you really are. Anyone can apologize when they're caught. I needed to see how far you were willing to go, how elaborate the deception would become, whether either of you would develop a conscience along the way. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. And we failed your test. This wasn't a test, Marcus. This was my life, my home, my security, my future. You turned it into a game where winning meant taking away everything I've worked for, and you're upset that I refuse to play by your rules. Through the kitchen window, I could see Rebecca pacing on the back porch, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling her friends, or maybe even her wedding planner, trying to figure out how to salvage her perfect day now that the funding had evaporated. She really does love you, Marcus said, following my gaze. This wasn't just about money for her. Wasn't it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, love would have looked like honesty. Love would have looked like concern for my actual well-being, not just my bank account. Love would have looked like including me in decisions about my own life instead of manipulating me into them. She was scared, he said. Scared that you'd say no. Scared that we couldn't afford the wedding we wanted. Scared that I'd be disappointed. So instead of dealing with those fears honestly, she decided to lie to her mother and steal her inheritance. That's not love, Marcus. That's selfishness dressed up in pretty words. Rebecca came back inside, her face flushed from crying and the cool October air. I just got off the phone with the wedding coordinator, she announced. We can postpone everything. Maybe have a smaller ceremony next year when our finances are better. I looked at her with something approaching pity. Even now, faced with the complete collapse of her scheme, she was still thinking about how to salvage her dream wedding, rather than acknowledging the damage she had done to our relationship. Rebecca, I said gently, postponing the wedding won't fix what's broken here. Then what will? She demanded, her voice rising with frustration. What do you want from us? An apology? We're sorry. A promise to do better? We promise. What else can we possibly give you? Nothing, I said simply. There's nothing you can give me because you've already taken the only thing that mattered. What? What did we take? My trust. My belief that you loved me for who I am, not what I own. My confidence that I raised a daughter who would protect me in my old age instead of seeing me as a financial opportunity. The words hung heavy in the air between us. Rebecca sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her as she finally began to understand the true scope of what had been lost. I never meant for it to happen this way, she whispered. It started as just an idea, a way to help you and help us at the same time. But then it got bigger and more complicated, and I didn't know how to stop it. You could have stopped it at any time by telling me the truth. And you would have said no. Maybe. Or maybe I would have found a way to help that didn't require me to give up my home and independence, but you'll never know because you never gave me that choice. Marcus cleared his throat. What happens now? Do we just pretend this never happened? I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. We can't pretend it never happened because it did happen. You both showed me exactly who you are when you think no one is watching. That knowledge doesn't just disappear because it's inconvenient. So what then? We're just not family anymore? The question came from Rebecca, and it cut deeper than I had expected. For all my preparation, for all my resolve, the idea of losing my only child still felt like a physical blow. I don't know what we are anymore, I answered honestly. Family is supposed to mean protection, loyalty, trust. People who have your back when the world gets difficult. What you offered me was the opposite of that. We were trying to protect you? Rebecca protested. The house is too big, too isolated. What if something happens to you? What if something happens to anyone? I countered. Life is uncertain, Rebecca. But the solution to uncertainty isn't to hand control of your life over to people who have already proven they'll prioritize their wants over your needs. I stood up and began gathering the documents scattered across the table. You wanted me to sign papers giving you power of attorney over all my financial decisions. Think about that for a moment. You wanted legal control over every dollar I've ever saved, every asset I've ever accumulated, every financial choice I might need to make for the rest of my life. It was just to make the house sale easier, Marcus said weakly. No, it wasn't. I've read these documents thoroughly. They give you control over everything, not just the house. My retirement accounts, my savings, my checking account, even my monthly Social Security payments. You would have had the legal right to move my money anywhere you wanted, to make investments on my behalf, to decide how much I'm allowed to spend on my own daily needs. The silence that followed was profound. Even Rebecca seemed to be realizing for the first time just how extensive the control they had been seeking really was. We wouldn't have abused that authority, she said finally. Wouldn't you? You've already shown me that you're willing to lie about senior living costs, fabricate urgency about community availability, and misrepresent your own financial situation to get what you want. Why would having legal control over my money make you more honest instead of less? I walked to the kitchen counter and pulled out one more document from my research file. This is a case study from the National Center on Elder Abuse. It details exactly how adult children typically exploit their elderly parents once they gain financial power of attorney. The pattern is always the same. Small withdrawals at first, justified as necessary expenses, then larger amounts for investments that, coincidentally, benefit the adult children. Eventually, complete depletion of the elderly person's assets, leaving them dependent on government assistance or family charity. I placed the document on the table where they could both see it. Every single step of that progression is represented in your plan. The only difference is that you wanted to do it all at once instead of gradually. Marcus was reading the case study with growing alarm. Maggie, we're not criminals. We're not con artists trying to steal from elderly people. Aren't you? What would you call convincing an elderly person to sell their home under false pretenses, using fabricated information about their options, and gaining legal control over their assets through emotional manipulation? We're family, Rebecca said desperately. That makes it different. Does it? Because according to this report, family members commit over 90% of elder financial abuse. Being related to your victims doesn't make you less of a predator. If anything, it makes you worse because you're exploiting love and trust that took decades to build. I sat back down, feeling suddenly tired. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep sadness that I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. The hardest part, I said softly, is realizing that this probably isn't the first time you've seen me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. How many other conversations have you had about my life without including me? How many other decisions have you made based on what's convenient for you rather than what I actually want? Rebecca was crying again, but silently this time, tears streaming down her face without the dramatic sobs that had marked her earlier breakdown. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to make you trust me again. I don't know either, I admitted. And that's the tragedy here. We've lost something that took 62 years to build, and I'm not sure it can ever be rebuilt. So you're really moving to Costa Rica? You're really leaving everything behind? I nodded. The arrangements are already made. I fly out next Thursday. Thursday? Marcus looked stunned. That's less than a week from now. The timing works well. My passport is current, my visa is approved, and the house sale closed yesterday. There's nothing keeping me here anymore. What about the wedding? Rebecca asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. What about it? You'll have a lovely ceremony. Take whatever honeymoon you can afford and start your married life together. My presence isn't required for any of that. But you're my mother. How can I get married without my mother there? The question broke my heart, but I forced myself to maintain composure. The same way you planned to sell my house without my real consent. The same way you were prepared to move me into senior living without checking whether I actually wanted to go. You've gotten very good at making major life decisions without considering my feelings. That's not fair, isn't it? You planned my entire future around your financial needs. You researched where I should live, how I should spend my money, what I should do with my property, all without asking what I wanted. Now you're upset that I'm making decisions about my own life without consulting you first? Marcus leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. We're talking about ending a family relationship over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Marcus, you brought legal documents designed to give you control over my life savings. You lied about costs, availability, and your own financial situation. You pressured me to make irreversible decisions based on false information. Which part of that was a misunderstanding? The part where you think we meant to hurt you. We were trying to help. Help yourselves, I corrected. Everything you proposed helped you more than it helped me. The timeline served your honeymoon schedule. The living arrangements would have given you access to my equity. The legal documents would have put my assets under your control. Where exactly was the benefit to me in any of this? He had no answer because there wasn't one. Every aspect of their plan had been designed to maximize their benefit while minimizing their effort and risk. They had wanted my money without the inconvenience of asking for it honestly. "Mom," Rebecca said, her voice small and desperate, "what if we called off the wedding? What if we started over, did things differently?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I had loved since before she was born, and felt a profound sense of loss. "Rebecca, the wedding isn't the problem. The problem is who you've become, the choices you've made, the values you've embraced. Calling off the wedding won't change any of that. Then what will? What would it take for you to forgive us?" I considered the question seriously. It deserved a thoughtful answer, even if that answer wasn't what she wanted to hear. "I don't know if forgiveness is possible right now," I said finally. "Trust is like a mirror. Once it's shattered, you can put the pieces back together, but you'll always see the cracks. Right now, I see cracks everywhere when I look at you." "So that's it? We're done? 28 years of being your daughter, and it's all gone because of one mistake?" "One mistake?" I stood up, feeling my carefully controlled emotions beginning to slip. "Rebecca, this wasn't one mistake. This was months of deliberate planning, systematic deception, and calculated manipulation. You researched my property values. Without telling me, you investigated senior living costs while lying about what you found. You brought legal documents to what you claimed was a casual conversation. You fabricated urgency about community availability. You misrepresented your financial situation and your parents' contributions." I moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where David and I had planted our first tomatoes 38 years ago. "Every single interaction we've had for the past 6 months has been tainted by your hidden agenda. Every phone call where you asked about my health, every visit where you commented on the house, every conversation about my future. All of it was manipulation designed to soften me up for this moment." "I was worried about you," Rebecca protested. "Were you? Or were you worried about securing your inheritance while you could still enjoy it? Because those are two very different kinds of worry." I turned back to face them both. Here's what real worry would have looked like. You would have called to check on me regularly without asking about my finances. You would have visited to spend time with me, not to evaluate my property. You would have discussed your wedding budget honestly and asked for whatever help I could afford to give. You would have respected my right to make my own decisions about where and how to live. "We can do all of those things now," Marcus said. "We can start over." "Can you?" "Because starting over would require me to forget everything I've learned about who you really are. It would require me to trust people who have already shown they're willing to lie to me when it serves their purposes. It would require me to believe that your behavior for the past 6 months was an aberration rather than a revelation." I walked back to the table and sat down one more time. "Let me ask you something, Marcus. If your own parents needed help, if they were elderly and vulnerable and sitting on a valuable asset, would you handle it the way you've handled this situation with me?" His face flushed red. "That's different." "How?" "They're my parents. And I'm Rebecca's mother. So how is it different?" He couldn't answer because there was no answer that didn't make him sound even worse than he already did. The implication of his statement was clear. His parents deserved honesty and respect, but I didn't. "The truth is," I said, "you both saw me as an easy target. An elderly widow living alone, probably lonely, probably grateful for attention, probably willing to do anything to help her daughter achieve her dreams. You counted on my love for Rebecca to override my common sense." "That's not true," Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Then explain why you never considered asking me directly for help with wedding expenses. Explain why you didn't research senior living options that I could actually afford long-term. Explain why you brought power of attorney documents to what you described as a preliminary discussion." She couldn't explain any of it because the explanations would have required admitting that they had seen me as a means to an end rather than a person with rights and feelings. The saddest part, I continued, is that if you had approached me honestly, I would have found a way to help. Not with $40,000 for a luxury honeymoon, but with something meaningful. I could have contributed to the wedding costs, helped with a down payment on a modest house, provided assistance with student loans or other debts. But it would have been my choice, given freely, not extracted through deception. It's not too late for that, Rebecca said eagerly. We could cancel the cruise, have a simple honeymoon, use whatever money you're comfortable giving us for practical things instead. I shook my head sadly. Rebecca, you're still not understanding. This isn't about the money anymore. This is about the fact that you were willing to destroy my security and independence to get what you wanted. The amount doesn't matter. The deception does. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Do we just never speak to each other again? I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I can't imagine having a relationship with either of you that isn't shaped by what I know about your willingness to manipulate me. Every conversation would be colored by the question of what you really want, what hidden agenda you might be pursuing. I looked at Rebecca, trying to see some trace of the little girl who used to bring me dandelion bouquets and promise to love me forever. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe someday you'll prove that you've learned something from this experience, that you've become someone worthy of trust again. But that day isn't today. And until then, you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices, the same way I'll have to live with the consequences of mine. Rebecca was staring at the table, tears dripping onto the scattered documents. I never meant for things to go this far. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said gently. And intent doesn't erase impact. The road to elder abuse is paved with good intentions and rationalized selfishness. Marcus stood up abruptly. I think we should go. This conversation isn't accomplishing anything productive. You're right, I agreed. There's nothing left to say. You came here to get my signature on documents that would have given you control over my life savings. Instead, you've learned that I'm not the naive, easily manipulated elderly woman you thought I was. Rebecca looked up at me one more time. Will you at least think about it? About giving us another chance? I considered her request seriously. I'll think about a lot of things, Rebecca. I'll think about the daughter I raised and the woman you've become. I'll think about the choices that led us to this moment and the choices that will shape what comes next. I'll think about forgiveness and trust and whether either is possible after this level of betrayal. But you won't change your mind about moving to Costa Rica? No. That decision is final. I'm leaving Thursday morning and I won't be coming back. What if there's an emergency? What if something happens to you down there? I smiled sadly. Rebecca, you spent 6 months planning to move me into institutional care where you could visit me occasionally. How is my living in Costa Rica any different except that I'll be happier? Because Costa Rica is so far away. Because we won't be able to help you if you need it. Help me? I repeated. The way you wanted to help me by taking control of my finances and selling my house? The way you wanted to help me by moving me into a facility I couldn't afford? Long term? That kind of help I can do without. Marcus was gathering up the documents they had brought, stuffing them haphazardly into the folder. Come on, Rebecca. We need to go. Rebecca stood slowly, like an old woman despite her 28 years. I love you, Mom. Whatever you think about me now, I want you to know that I love you. I love you too, I said, and meant it. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. Love should have protected me from this kind of treatment, not made me vulnerable to it. They moved toward the front door, their movements hesitant and uncertain. At the threshold, Rebecca turned back one more time. Will you let me know when you get to Costa Rica safely? Will you at least give me that much? I considered her request. I'll send you one message when I arrive to let you know I'm safe. After that, I need time to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, we can have going forward. How much time? I don't know. Maybe months. Maybe years. Maybe never. That depends on whether you use this time to reflect on what happened, here and why, or whether you use it to convince yourself that you were the victim in this situation. Marcus opened the front door, clearly eager to escape. Goodbye, Maggie. I hope you'll reconsider. Goodbye, Marcus. I hope you'll learn something from this experience that makes you a better husband to my daughter than you were a son-in-law to me. Rebecca lingered in the doorway for a moment longer. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for all of it. I know you are, I said. But sorry doesn't give me back the trust you destroyed or the security you threatened. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you were willing to sacrifice my well-being for your honeymoon fund. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? I thought about her question seriously. Yes. You can figure out how you became someone who thought this was acceptable behavior. You can examine the values and priorities that led you to this point. And you can decide whether you want to be the kind of person who protects the people she loves or the kind who exploits them. And if I do that work, if I change, then maybe someday we can have a conversation about rebuilding trust. But, Rebecca, that's going to take years, not weeks. And it's going to require you to prove through your actions, not just your words, that you've become someone different. She nodded slowly, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of what had been broken. I'll do the work, Mom. I promise I'll do the work. Do it for yourself, not for me. Do it because you want to be a person worthy of the trust and love that others give you. Do it because you want to be someone your father would have been proud of. The mention of David seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She had always been Daddy's little girl, and she knew that David would have been horrified by her behavior. He would have hated this, wouldn't he? Dad would have been so disappointed in me. Yes, I said simply. He would have been heartbroken to see you treating me this way. But he also would have believed in your ability to become better. That's the kind of man he was. With that, she turned and walked away, Marcus beside her, leaving me alone in the house where I had raised her, where David and I had dreamed of growing old together, where I had never imagined I would have to protect myself from my own child. I watched through the window as they drove away, Rebecca's shoulders shaking with sobs, Marcus staring straight ahead with the grim expression of someone whose carefully laid plans had just imploded. When their car disappeared around the corner, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For 6 months, I had been living with the stress of knowing that people I loved were plotting against me. I had carried the burden of their deception, the weight of their manipulation, the constant vigilance required to protect myself from their schemes. Now, finally, that burden was lifted. They knew that I knew, and they knew that their plan had failed completely. I spent the rest of that Saturday afternoon walking through my empty house, saying goodbye to 38 years of memories. In the living room, I remembered Rebecca's first steps, taken on Christmas morning when she was 11 months old. In the kitchen, I could still see David teaching her to crack eggs for Sunday morning pancakes. In her bedroom, now a guest room, I recalled countless nights of reading bedtime stories and checking for monsters under the bed. Those memories were precious, and they were mine to keep regardless of what had happened between us. Rebecca couldn't take them away, just as she couldn't change the fact that for 28 years, I had been a good mother who loved her unconditionally. The failure was hers, not mine. That evening, I called my friend Patricia to let her know about the house sale and my upcoming move. Patricia had been my closest friend since Rebecca was in elementary school, and she had watched the entire family dynamic play out over the years. I can't say I'm surprised, Patricia said after I explained what had happened. I've been worried about Rebecca's attitude toward money ever since she started dating Marcus. remember last Christmas when she made those comments about you sitting on all that equity while they were struggling with student loans? I did remember, though I had dismissed the comments at the time as idle conversation, rather than the reconnaissance mission I now realized they had been. You saw this coming? I saw the warning signs, the way she talked about your house as if it were already hers, the way she and Marcus would calculate property values and investment returns whenever they visited. I tried to bring it up once, but you seemed so happy to have them interested in your life that I didn't want to spoil it. I wish you had said something. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was being paranoid and jealous? She was right, of course. 6 months ago, if Patricia had warned me that Rebecca was planning to manipulate me into selling my house, I would have defended my daughter and possibly damaged our friendship. Sometimes we have to learn painful lessons through our own experience, rather than through the wisdom of others. What will you do now? Patricia asked. Are you really moving to Costa Rica? Thursday morning. The house is closed, my affairs are settled, and my flight is booked. That's awfully fast. Are you sure you're not running away from this situation instead of dealing with it? I considered her question seriously. Was I running away? Or was I finally running toward something better? I think I'm running toward the life I should have been living all along, I said finally. For 38 years, I've lived in this house, in this town, in this pattern of putting everyone else's needs before my own. David's career came first when he was alive. Rebecca's needs came first when she was growing up. Even after she moved away, I organized my life around her visits, her preferences, her timeline. And now? Now I'm going to organize my life around what makes me happy. Warm weather, ocean breezes, a community of people who chose adventure over security. For the first time in decades, I'm going to wake up each morning and ask myself what I want to do with the day, not what others need from me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I'll miss you, but I think you're doing the right thing. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to change everything. Will you visit? The community where I'm moving has a guest cottage that visitors can rent. Try to stop me. I've been dreaming of retirement in a tropical paradise for years. After we hung up, I felt more confident than ever in my decision. Rebecca and Marcus had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible. They had forced me to examine my life honestly and make changes I might never have had the courage to make otherwise. Sunday morning, I attended services at the small Methodist church where David and I had been married, where Rebecca had been baptized, where I had found comfort during the darkest days after David's death. Pastor Williams approached me after the service, his weathered face kind and concerned. Maggie, I heard you sold the house. Are you doing all right? Word traveled fast in a small town, especially when it involved one of the oldest families in the community. I gave him a brief, sanitized version of events, focusing on my decision to relocate rather than the family drama that had precipitated it. Costa Rica sounds lovely, he said. Will you be attending services there? There's a small English-speaking congregation near where I'll be living. I'm looking forward to meeting new people and perhaps finding new ways to serve. God has a way of opening doors when we need them most, Pastor Williams said. Sometimes those doors lead us in directions we never expected to go. Sometimes the unexpected directions turn out to be exactly where we needed to be all along. Monday morning brought a flurry of last-minute preparations. I had arranged for an estate sale company to handle most of my remaining possessions, keeping only what would fit in 2 large suitcases and a shipping box. The process of deciding what to keep and what to let go was both painful and liberating. I kept David's wedding ring and watch, photo albums documenting Rebecca's childhood, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to my parents. Everything else, the accumulation of nearly 4 decades in one house, would be sold to strangers who would give these objects new meaning in their own lives. The hardest decision involved Rebecca's baby items, carefully preserved in the attic in hopes of future grandchildren. The tiny clothes, the handmade quilts, the silver rattle that had been a christening gift from David's parents. In the end, I packed them in a box and shipped them to Rebecca's apartment in Seattle with a note. For when you're ready to love someone more than you love their inheritance. Tuesday brought an unexpected visitor. Tom Brennan knocked on my door in the late afternoon, carrying a briefcase and wearing the serious expression he reserved for important legal matters. "Maggie, I wanted to review your final documents before you leave the country. There are a few items that need your attention." We sat in my nearly empty living room, surrounded by boxes and the echoes of a life being packed away. Tom had prepared a comprehensive estate plan that protected my assets while ensuring they would ultimately benefit causes I cared about, rather than people who had already proven unworthy of such trust. "The trust is irrevocable," he explained. "Once you sign these final papers, no one can pressure you to change the terms, no matter what family emergencies or sob stories they might present. And if Rebecca genuinely changes, if she proves over time that she's become someone worthy of trust again, there are provisions for small gifts during your lifetime, if you choose to make them. But the bulk of your estate will go to the charities." We discussed, regardless of any future reconciliation. I signed the documents with steady hands, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with legalities and everything to do with taking control of my own narrative. Rebecca would inherit my love, my memories, and the lessons I had tried to teach her throughout her life. But she would not inherit the fruits of my labor unless she earned them through genuine transformation. "There's one more thing," Tom said as he prepared to leave. "Rebecca called my office yesterday. She wanted to know if there was any way to contest the house sale or challenge your mental competency." I wasn't surprised, though I was disappointed, that Rebecca was still looking for ways to access my assets rather than ways to repair our relationship. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that the sale was completely legal, that you were obviously of sound mind and judgment, and that any attempt to challenge your decisions would likely result in a restraining order against further harassment." "Did she accept that?" "She asked me to recommend another attorney who might give her a different opinion." I declined, of course. Wednesday evening, I sat on my front porch for the last time, watching the sun set behind the Douglas firs that had sheltered this house for decades. The estate sale was scheduled for Friday, after my departure, and by the weekend, strangers would be walking through these rooms, deciding which pieces of my life were worth purchasing. It felt strange to leave without saying goodbye to Rebecca, but I knew that any contact would only provide her with another opportunity to manipulate the situation. She had proven that she viewed our relationship as transactional, and I was no longer willing to participate in that transaction. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was short and devastating. "Mom, please don't do this. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix them. Please don't leave us like this. I love you. Rebecca." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar tug of maternal love warring with the hard-won wisdom of experience. The old Maggie would have responded immediately, would have found some way to soften the consequences, would have prioritized Rebecca's feelings over her own safety and security. The new Maggie, the one who had learned to protect herself from people who would exploit her love, turned off the phone without responding. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather in the Pacific Northwest. I loaded my suitcases into the taxi that would take me to the Portland airport, took one last look at the house where I had spent more than half my life, and closed the door on that chapter of my story. At the airport, as I waited for my flight to San Jose, I allowed myself to think about what I was leaving behind and what I was moving toward. I was leaving behind a daughter who had chosen greed over love, a son-in-law who saw me as a financial opportunity, and a community where everyone would soon know the details of my family's dysfunction. But I was also leaving behind the version of myself who had allowed others to define her value, who had measured her worth by her usefulness to others, who had been willing to sacrifice her own security for the approval of people who didn't deserve it. When my flight was called, I boarded without looking back, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and the hard-earned knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst impulses, even when that someone is your own child. The plane lifted off through the Oregon clouds, climbing toward blue sky and a future that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of my new home in Costa Rica, watching howler monkeys play in the cecropia trees while my morning coffee grew cold in my hands. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before me, painted in shades of turquoise and gold by the rising sun. This was my daily reality now, and it still felt like a dream. My house in the Guanacaste province was everything the real estate agent had promised and more. A modest 2-bedroom villa with traditional tile floors, ceiling fans that circulated the warm breeze, and walls painted the color of sunset. The community of Playa Hermosa was small but vibrant, populated by American and European expatriates who had chosen adventure over convention, warmth over familiarity. My neighbor Elena, a retired teacher from Minnesota, had become my closest friend. She'd moved here 5 years earlier after her husband's death, seeking healing in a place where memories couldn't follow. We walked the beach together each morning, practiced Spanish with our patient housekeeper Maria, and spent evenings on each other's terraces, sharing stories and watching magnificent sunsets. "Any word from Rebecca?" Elena asked during one of our walks, her question gentle but direct. She knew the entire story, having become my confidant during those first difficult weeks when doubt and guilt threatened to overwhelm my resolve. "Not since the Christmas card," I replied, kicking at a piece of driftwood half buried in the sand. "She sends updates through Patricia occasionally. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. Marcus found work with a different company. They're living in a smaller apartment now." "Do you miss her?" It was a question Elena asked periodically, not because she disapproved of my decision, but because she understood the complexity of maternal love. Missing someone and wanting them back in your life weren't the same thing. "I miss the daughter. I thought I had," I said carefully. "I miss believing that she loved me unconditionally. But I don't miss the anxiety, the constant vigilance, the feeling that I had to protect myself from my own child." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching sandpipers chase retreating waves. The rhythm of the ocean had become my meditation, washing away the accumulated stress of years spent managing other people's expectations. "Patricia mentioned that Rebecca asked for your address," Elena said eventually. "She did. Patricia didn't give it to her." "Would you want her to have it?" I considered the question seriously. "Not yet. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed for genuine change to occur. But right now, any contact would just be another attempt to manipulate the situation to her advantage." My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia back in Oregon. Rebecca had driven by the old house last week, apparently unaware that new owners had already moved in. The current residents, a young family with 3 children, had found her crying in the driveway and called the police, thinking she might be casing the property for a break-in. The image of my daughter sobbing outside the home where she'd grown up, finally understanding what she had lost, should have made me sad. Instead, I felt nothing but a distant pity for someone who had engineered her own exile and was finally experiencing the consequences. That afternoon, I volunteered at the local literacy center, where I taught English to Costa Rican children whose parents worked in the tourism industry. The job paid nothing, but provided immense satisfaction, connecting me to a community in a way that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. 8-year-old Carlos struggled with pronunciation, his tongue tripping over English consonants that didn't exist in Spanish. I was patient with him, remembering Rebecca at the same age, equally frustrated with reading challenges that seemed insurmountable at the time. "Senora Maggie," Carlos said during our session, "why did you come to Costa Rica? Are you running away from something?" Children asked the most direct questions, cutting through adult politeness to reach uncomfortable truths. I thought about how to answer honestly without burdening him with adult complexities. "I came here because I wanted to discover who I could become when I stopped trying to please everyone else," I said. "Sometimes we have to travel very far from home to find ourselves." He nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "My mama says home is where people love you for who you are, not what you can give them." The wisdom of children, filtered through a mother's experience, hit me with unexpected force. Carlos's mama understood something that had taken me 62 years to learn. That evening, I sat with my journal on the terrace, something I'd started doing after arriving in Costa Rica. Dr. Martinez, the therapist I'd been seeing to process the trauma of Rebecca's betrayal, had suggested writing as a way to examine my feelings without judgment. The entries from my first weeks here documented rage, grief, and crushing loneliness. I'd questioned every decision, wondered if I'd been too harsh, imagined scenarios where forgiveness and reconciliation might be possible. But as the months passed, the entries shifted toward gratitude, peace, and a growing sense of identity that wasn't defined by my relationships with others. Tonight's entry would be different. For the first time since leaving Oregon, I felt ready to acknowledge the gift Rebecca had unknowingly given me. "Dear Journal," I wrote, "today I realized that Rebecca's betrayal freed me from a prison I didn't even know I was in. For 38 years, I lived my life according to other people's expectations, needs, and timelines. I was David's wife, Rebecca's mother, the helpful neighbor, the reliable friend. But I was never just Maggie living for herself." I paused, listening to the evening chorus of insects and distant waves, then continued writing. "Rebecca forced me to choose between enabling her selfishness and protecting my own welfare. By making that choice so stark, so undeniable, she made it impossible for me to continue the pattern of self-sacrifice that had defined my entire adult life. In trying to take everything from me, she actually gave me everything I never knew I wanted." A knock at my door interrupted my journaling. Elena stood on my doorstep holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression she reserved for important conversations. "I have news," she announced, settling into her favorite chair on my terrace. "The kind that might upset you, but that you need to hear." I poured wine for both of us, preparing myself for whatever revelation she'd brought. I was on Facebook earlier, checking on my grandchildren's activities, when I saw a post from your friend Patricia. She tagged you, forgetting that you're not on social media anymore. Elena showed me her phone screen. Patricia had shared a link to a local news article from Millbrook, Oregon. The headline read, "Local woman arrested for elder financial abuse." My hands trembled slightly as I read the details. A 73-year-old man named Harold Morrison had filed charges against his daughter and son-in-law for forging his signature on property transfer documents and stealing over $200,000 from his retirement accounts. The daughter's name was Jennifer Morrison, but the son-in-law was identified as Marcus Chen. Marcus had married someone else. Marcus, who had promised to love and honor my daughter, had abandoned her when their scheme against me failed and found another elderly target to exploit. "Rebecca doesn't know yet," Elena said gently. According to Patricia's post, she still thinks Marcus is working in Seattle. I stared at the article, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. Marcus had revealed his true nature just as I'd suspected he would, but Rebecca had been as much his victim as his accomplice. "Will you warn her?" Elena asked. "How can I? I don't have her contact information, and she'd probably think any warning from me was an attempt to manipulate her back into relationship." Patricia could tell her. I considered this option seriously. Did I owe Rebecca protection from her own poor choices? Or would warning her about Marcus simply enable her to continue avoiding the consequences of her actions? No, I decided. Finally. Rebecca is an adult who chose to align herself with someone whose values matched her own. She needs to discover the truth about Marcus the same way I discovered the truth about her. Through experience, not through rescue. Elena nodded approvingly. You've learned to distinguish between helping and enabling. Dr. Martinez calls it allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their choices. Rebecca chose Marcus over honesty, manipulation over respect, short-term gain over long-term relationships. She needs to live with those choices fully before she can make different ones. 3 weeks later, Patricia called with updates I'd been expecting. Rebecca had discovered Marcus's new marriage through a mutual friend's social media post. The confrontation had been explosive, with Marcus claiming that Rebecca's failure to secure my money had forced him to find alternative funding for his lifestyle. Rebecca had finally seen him clearly, but only after he'd discarded her for someone more useful. She's devastated, Patricia reported. She keeps saying she should have listened to you, that you tried to warn her about his character. Did I asked, genuinely curious about Patricia's recollection of events. Not directly, but you never seemed comfortable with him. You'd get this guarded look whenever he talked about investments or real estate opportunities. I remembered those conversations differently. I had felt uncomfortable, but I'd dismissed my instincts as paranoia or jealousy. I'd wanted Rebecca to be happy more than I'd wanted to protect my own interests. Is she asking about me? About reconciliation? Constantly. She wants to know if there's any way to rebuild the relationship, any path back to your good graces. And what do you tell her? That healing takes time, that trust has to be earned through consistent action over months or years, not through apologies and promises. I was proud of Patricia for refusing to pressure me toward premature forgiveness. Too many people believed that family relationships trumped personal safety, that unconditional love meant accepting unlimited abuse. Has she taken any steps toward genuine change, therapy, self-reflection, acknowledging the full extent of what she did? She's seeing a counselor, but mostly to process her grief over Marcus. I'm not sure she's examined her own role in what happened between you two. That answer told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca was treating herself as Marcus's victim rather than examining how she'd become someone capable of victimizing others. Until she took responsibility for her own choices, any reconciliation would be superficial and temporary. 1 year after leaving Oregon, I celebrated my 63rd birthday on the beach with Elena and a dozen other expatriate friends who had become my chosen family. We drank local wine, ate fresh fish grilled over driftwood, and shared stories of the lives we'd left behind and the dreams we were building. Any regrets? Asked James, a retired accountant from Canada who'd moved here after his divorce. About leaving Oregon? None whatsoever. About the circumstances that made leaving necessary? Every day. Do you think Rebecca will ever understand what she lost? This question came from Sarah, a former nurse who'd raised 3 children as a single mother. I think she's beginning to understand that actions have consequences, that people won't tolerate being manipulated indefinitely. Whether she understands the deeper lessons about love, respect, and integrity remains to be seen. As my friends cleaned up our beach party, I walked to the water's edge alone, letting warm waves wash over my feet while I considered the year that had passed. I'd learned Spanish, mastered the art of tropical gardening, developed a network of genuine friendships, and discovered interests I'd never had time to pursue. More importantly, I'd learned to live for myself without feeling guilty about it. I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead rather than anxious about other people's expectations. I made decisions based on what would make me happy and healthy rather than what would please or appease others. The woman who had sat in her Millbrook kitchen, terrified of her daughter's schemes and desperate to protect herself, felt like a character from someone else's story. I was proud of her for finding the strength to escape, but I was even prouder of who I'd become since that escape. My phone buzzed with a message from an international number I didn't recognize. The text was brief. "Mom, I know you probably won't respond, but I needed you to know that I finally understand what I did to you. I'm working with a therapist to figure out how I became someone capable of such cruelty. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see my mistakes clearly now. I love you. Rebecca." I read the message 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Instead, I found something I'd never seen from Rebecca before: accountability without excuses, acknowledgement without demands for immediate absolution. For the first time in over a year, I felt a tiny spark of hope for my daughter's future, though not necessarily for our relationship. Rebecca was finally beginning the work of becoming someone worthy of love and trust, though that work would take years to complete. I deleted the message without responding, but I didn't delete the hope. Someday, perhaps, Rebecca would complete her transformation, and we might explore the possibility of a new relationship built on honesty, rather than manipulation, but that day was still far in the future, and I was in no hurry to reach it. For now, I was content to watch the sunset paint the Costa Rican sky in brilliant oranges and purples, grateful for the daughter who had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the courage to claim my own life before it was too late. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.